Hello, hello, hello. I am Tracy Otsuka, your host. Thank you so much for joining me here for another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. You know that my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. And in the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met a one that wasn't truly brilliant at something, not one. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Arielle Paul is a writer, musician, adventurer, and lifelong student and practitioner of Kriya Yoga. Listen to the story. I love the story. Unable to read or write at 10 years old, she was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. Though teachers said she would never amount to anything academically and suggested she be put on Ritalin, her parents had other plans. She began neurofeedback therapy, working tirelessly with tutors. She learned to meditate, and eventually she graduated from UC Berkeley, summa cum laude, and Phi Beta Kappa with a double major in English and performance studies. My daughter is a performance studies major. Harnessing things that are painful, like learning disabilities and the written word, into something tangible and meaningful has been the cornerstone of Arielle's journey. She wrote for the Los Angeles Times for 6 years, penning the My Favorite Room column and covering stories on design, architecture, and mental health. She's now a contributing reporter for the New York Times, writing stories on development in live-work-play spaces, intersecting with sustainability and climate change. Her feature on excess water consumption in Dubai was on the business and international front pages and brought the subject of desalination to the forefront at last year's United Nations Climate Change Conference. Arielle was born and raised in Los Angeles and is the mother of 3 adorable cats, Frodo, Hobbs, and Drogon. Okay, Arielle, you know that we always talk about the ADHD diagnosis first. So I would love to hear your ADHD and dyslexia origin story, because I just love like rags to riches stories. That's not what I mean, but you know what I'm saying, where someone basically tells you you're never going to amount to anything in life, and they are totally wrong, and you turn around and you make them eat crow. So I love it.
Eat crow. I love that. It was quite a journey. I, as you mentioned, was unable to read and write by the time I was 10 years old. And that was partially before I even got diagnosed. I went to a Waldorf school in Los Angeles called Highland Hall, which was a absolutely wonderful, magical experience. And I owe so much to Waldorf education for so much of who I am now. They really allow students' motivation to arise from within and forgo competitive testing and academic placement and rewards to motivate learning. But unfortunately, the teacher that I had during that time was not fully prepared. And for so many different reasons that I don't need to get into, most of my class by the 4th grade didn't know how to read or write. So in a way, my neurodivergencies were able to kind of stay sort of subterranean, because I was always the weirdo of the weirdos. We call us the Waldorks. So I was definitely like a Waldorf dork. But yeah, so at that point, it was halfway through the 4th grade that my parents and most of my class actually left the school. And so I finished the rest of 4th grade at sort of a similar kind of Montessori-esque school, non-traditional. And then I was put into public school for the 5th grade. And so that's 3 schools within, a couple years. And I was seeing all these tutors on the side just to learn how to read, just to be able to join, normal kids to get up to date. And when I was in the school, I was in my neurodivergencies definitely showed at that point, especially around a lot of neurotypical children and my difficulty with concentration, obviously the learning disabilities of not being able to read or write and being so behind in that, but just also being so unaccustomed to things like grades, social norms that are expected in these kinds of situations. And I remember that time where I was, in the principal's office with my parents and with my teachers. And when it was said in front of me to my parents that she will never amount to anything academically, they wanted me to be put.
Said that?
I don't remember if it was the principal or I think it was my teacher. It was the teacher because she wasn't very nice.
No. And not very knowledgeable either.
Apparently not. But in any event, they suggested that I either be put in special education or on Ritalin, which my parents said no to both. And instead, they decided to sort of start looking into alternative routes for helping me with that. They got me diagnosed. I was diagnosed with both ADHD and dyslexia. And that's when they found out about neurofeedback, EEG neurofeedback therapy. And I started to do that. And it was actually quite a full circle, beautiful journey because my father is also diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia and has struggled with it his whole life. And,
Had he been diagnosed before you?
I believe he had. That's a great question because I think it was always common knowledge that he was, and I think he was as a child. But he had never really done anything about it. He didn't have the tools back then, and it wasn't as much of the cultural common zeitgeist, especially in the medical world, to be able to talk about it and and in psychology. And so, he decided to do this with me. He signed up for neurofeedback therapy and we did it together. And, it was really powerful for both of us and also made me feel not so less than to be able to share it with my father. But the way that it works is, I think they clip these electrodes to the side of your head and it connects you to the computer. And on the screen, you can see your brain waves. And the philosophy is that if you can see your brain waves in real time, you have the ability to change them. And so I worked with Margaret Ayers, who was a pioneer in this therapy. And she put it in a way that I thought was so impactful. I'll never forget. She said this is a mirror, so to speak, for the brain. So because you can see your brain waves, you can comb them into place, similar to how you would look in the mirror to comb your hair, right? And because you can see your hair, you can comb it into place. So similar, because you can see your brain waves, you have the ability then to start controlling them. It's like a visual meditation almost. And it really enhances intrinsic learning from within and becomes permanent through repetition. So I started doing this and then continued with my onslaught of tutors that were incredible. And something that I was also so grateful for is that I was raised with meditation and yoga as a child, with my parents being longtime practitioners. And now, as somebody who is a deep practitioner myself, I'm even more grateful than I've ever have been to see the impact that had on me at that time in my life, and sort of learning these tools to be able to incorporate breath work into that.
Okay, so let's back up.
Yes, that was a lot.
No. There's so many questions I have along the way. And I know that you have a really interesting family history and, how all of this kind of plays in together. So I'm curious on the EEG. So they would clip these, like electrode-y type things onto the side of your head.
Yeah.
And then you could see your brain. And then what would you do? Like, what changed?
So the version that I had, there was two different versions. There's one where you're actually seeing the brain waves, and by watching it, you're trying to make it go down. So essentially what you're seeing are the theta and beta brain waves going. And you want to be able to bring the theta brain waves down and that's like what you're trying to do. But the version that she cultivated for, I think, children was that I had this almost little video game character, and there were steps to different levels. And by my concentration, I could move him or her or them up. And so that was what my goal was in the version that I did, was moving this character with my mental focus up to another level.
You're teaching yourself how to focus.
Exactly.
And building new neural pathways.
Exactly. Which is the same that meditation does as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious, did it work for your dad too? Yeah. And how much did it work for you? How much did it affect your focus and inattention versus your dyslexia? I'm curious, what happened there?
It's an interesting question, because I think it was such a transformative, fast time of my life between the 4th grade and then, public school in the 5th grade, and then in yet another school. So a 4th school starting middle school. And so I was catching up with so much that had been amiss for me during those years, that it's hard to say. But what I know is that I think they helped each other. I think the neurofeedback helped the focusing and the anxiety, so that I had the ability to pause when I was reading and not flip words and letters around, which I still do sometimes. Even as, a writer, I catch it here and there, and it's like that little humbling, like, oh no, you're still you. But I really found that it helped me be able to sort of pause and take it one word at a time, one letter at a time. I'll never forget reading James and the Giant Peach was, I think, the first book I made it through, and it was like hell. I threw that book so many times and cried, and just, it was a torturous story, albeit a very lovely one for anybody who loves James and the Giant Peach. There's nothing against that, but for me, all I can think about is just the absolute tumult of trying to make it through a page, a sentence. So I did notice the ability to be able to do that. Literally learn how to read and to make it through, and sort of the neurofeedback, being able to calm yourself, to be able to focus in a new way.
The nervous system. So,
exactly.
So you didn't do any other program like Orton Gillingham or anything like that for reading. All you did was this neurofeedback, and somehow that allowed you to at least be in the moment, pause, calm your nervous system so that you could start to learn how to read.
Yeah, absolutely. That, along with meditating, learning how to meditate, and then obviously tutors who are teaching me, the ABCs and the grammar and all that stuff and then when I'm in school as well, which was just half of it, going over my head.
So are you a reader now, or do you tend to use audiobooks more?
It's so interesting. I have only recently graduated to audiobooks. I have just been a good old book reader. I didn't even want to do Kindle or anything. I was just like an old-fashioned book with paper. And I think it's just interesting how something that caused so much pain for so long ended up becoming something that I love. But that said, I have been always frustrated at still the slowness of my reading. And it's partially because of the learning disabilities. And it's also part of because I take everything apart and I analyze it and I underline things and then I highlight them and then I star them and then I do tab it or whatever. And it's like, okay, wow.
And do research around it and then you forget you're even reading.
Exactly. It's just like a tangential journey. And so now that I'm listening to more audiobooks, I'm actually able to read, quote unquote, more books. And that's like bringing me so much joy because I'm getting more in. And certainly there's some books like yours, for example, was one that I did in tandem with listening because you just have such an amazing voice and the way you just tell the stories. I loved it. I loved being with you during it. But I had the book with me because I was constantly underlining and writing things down because I was just like, oh, it me. Everything that you were saying, I felt so seen. And so there's so many times where I will have the actual book with me as well as listening to it.
And I'm exactly like that. And it's even worse for me I will have the audiobook, I will have the physical book, and then I will have the Kindle. Because I discovered that if you connect Readwise, do you do this to the Kindle?
No.
You can highlight certain sections, and then you have a PDF of all your highlights at the end. And then you can send an email to yourself. Mine comes at 3 p.m. I have two, one at 9 a.m. and one at 3 p.m. And it comes with just a quote from one of the books I read, who knows when. So it kind of stays in my, I don't know, environment. Like I'll kind of remember, that quote, yeah. And then that brings the book back rather than you read this book and 2 years later, you can't even remember you read the book.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I need to do that. That's completely
maybe you don't.
Up my alley.
It gets expensive.
Okay. Do I need another thing?
Yeah. But the beauty of a Kindle is when you travel, you don't have to take all those damn books, right? The thing 100%. Is so light. And I like the little cheap one because it's smaller for my hands. So I just need to develop a system where that's the only system I do. And unfortunately, that is not, it's kind of like however I feel. So that's how I end up with 3. Okay. And then, so you did not take any kind of special program for reading. Of course, you had tutors and all that. And maybe there was a special program that they were working with you through for a dyslexic brain. Because I've never heard of a situation where, you can all of a sudden learn how to read kind of on your own. And so this is what's so interesting to me. You talked about the Waldorf school system. And I remember having a friend who, it was the exact same thing. So she had 3 kids in the Waldorf school system. She ended up pulling the 3rd one out, who was the youngest, because by the time they got through the system, it was exactly the same thing. The 2 girls could not read. They couldn't read at all. And who are the kind of kids that tend to go to Waldorf schools, right? They're probably kids of neurodiverse parents. So they have their own neurodiversity. So I know for a lot of kids, they can kind of teach themselves how to read on their own, right? So there were probably some kids in the Waldorf school that it doesn't really matter because they're just going to teach themselves how. But I think it's the kids that struggle the most and probably have dyslexia that end up not reading. And it was exactly what you said. They loved the school. They loved everything about the school except for, the kid couldn't read. So I find your story interesting and relatable.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. And, I have people very close to me who graduated high school from Waldorf. They did the entire full 12 years and are incredible and doctors and, extremely successful people. And my best friend from kindergarten who also was with me at Waldorf and left in the 4th grade as well. But she was one of the ones who did know how to read. She still left because it was just sort of a grand exodus. All her friends were gone. She was like the lonely dinosaur. So she was like, okay, there's no point. I don't know if that's exactly the mindset, but I can imagine it would have been lonely with all the friends leaving.
And I'm sure it's also that social construct, right? You get this sense that, because 4th grade seems to be the time that a lot of kids leave Waldorf, in my experience, like just friends that I know that have been in Waldorf education. And I think it's this fear that, oh my gosh, we're going to fall behind, right? Because that's how our school system works. You get tested, you end up in are you in the advanced placement classes? If you're not going to get into as good schools. If you are in advanced placement, are you at the top of your class? Like the whole thing is just ridiculous. It's not about learning, right? It's not about what is that child interested in and how can we help him, her, them to, explore that, right? Because that's where they're going to be brilliant.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about it, and who's to say, on a sort of sliding doors situation, had I stayed, had I not ended up at the same place, perhaps. But this was my journey and, and it was hard. It was a really hard journey to transition to such a neurotypical life and school system and community and peers and all of that. And, but it was, I think, a pivotal part of what made me who I am now, having to go through all of that.
Absolutely. And then you were the child of an unusual family. So what did your dad do? I know,
So,
but
so my dad is one of the founding members of the Manhattan Transfer, which is a multi-Grammy winning vocal group.
yeah.
And they, at the time, I'm an only child. I'm extremely close to both my parents. And it was really important for my family and for us to maintain our bond and our unit. And so especially I would say, ironically, 10 seems to be a big number for me, right? Didn't learn how to read or write till I was 10. All this stuff left the schools. But I also, those first 10 years was touring with my dad. I would go for, months at a time, and my mom and I would go, and we'd go on these adventures and be a part of this world. And it was quite an experience to be a part of that. And, and there were certain things that made it harder back at home for me and certain sacrifices, but it was also such an incredible childhood too. And obviously, as being a Waldorf student, I just brought my knitting homework with me or whatever, my coloring books. I'm not to say that what I was learning at Waldorf wasn't important or meaningful, but as far as the ability to be brought out of school in a normal school system, it would have been much more challenging, and I'd be so behind. Yeah. So I really appreciate that in a way Waldorf was able to sort of support that experience as well.
Well, and I'm sorry, but first of all, I can't imagine being in the normal school system and then doing all that traveling. But if you ask me, would you rather have a child who gets to travel for the first 10 years of their life and see the world versus sit in a classroom? And I don't know, to me, there's no comparison there. And so the fact that you were at a school that was okay with that, because most schools would not have been. When my daughter was 15, she was down in LA a lot doing showcases. She was a vocalist, a jazz singer, actually.
Oh, wonderful.
And my son was at a country day school, which was supposed to be a little bit more like Waldorf, right? Where it was less linear. They were supposed to teach to interest, all of that. Well, they didn't. And they were so upset about the fact that he was gone a lot because we would take him with us, and they wouldn't give him his homework in advance. And I remember now that you're talking about it, that this was part of the problem too with Marcus and struggling in school. But I wasn't just going to leave him here. And I really thought, and he ended up getting into NYU as a rapper. So he had talent.
Amazing.
And I just felt like that's life experience, and you're never going to forget that. And to me, that was more important than sitting there and doing, it wasn't the Catholic school that had the problem. It was the country day school, because he had moved from a Catholic school to a country day school. And I thought that they would be more flexible. They would allow him to do his homework, when he could do his homework. Of course, we would help him. But we discovered that they weren't, You just kind of got to fit that mold, and you got to stay in that box.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Ariel, what were you like as a kid?
I've been given the nickname, which is also my spirit animal on my wrist, is Little Hummingbird.
That's my favorite bird.
Yeah, me too. I feel like it's like the ultimate neurodivergent bird.
Yeah.
But I was exuberant, full of energy, full of curiosity, excitable, completely ADHD, bouncing off the walls, there was a light about me. And I think that it took me a long time. This whole chapter we talked about of getting diagnosed and switching schools and all this, it took me years of my life. I mean, I would even say it's I feel like only in the last 5 years that I've really gotten back to that light and spirit of who I was then, to be honest. But there was such and I think that experience of being on tour and, a new country, a new city every couple days, just was so exciting for a brain like mine to be able to be exposed to that, and so many different kinds of people and cultures and languages and food. Oh my God. And And it was interesting because I was around adults. I was around a bunch of jazz musicians and, and in a very adult environment. And so that there was a certain comfort that I had with adults, even though I was this sort of hummingbird, little sprite. There was a certain also comfort that I had with that environment and that demographic and a struggle with children. And I think partially because it was hard for me to form deep bonds because I was away so much. I was, and my family moved a lot as well, in the first, like up till high school, I think we moved about 7 times. So there was just a lot of change, which in some ways can be amazing for neurodivergent brains. And it's also when there's a yearning to sort of create foundation and grounding, that can also be very challenging. And I would remember, I was the kind of kid who would make a friend anywhere and anyhow, basically. So, I'd be at the airport in Zurich and I'd be like, hi, you want to be my friend, to some kid who doesn't know my language. And we just start playing with my, Gunda bears and My Little Ponies. And then we're friends and we play for 2 hours and then it's bye, but I think that was a pain that I think I felt. And it was always hard when I went back to school, this idea of, well, she's off going on tour and living this glamorous life and doing this whole thing. And so I think that there was sort of that disconnect that I had with peers, even though I wanted nothing more than to just fit in and be one of the wool dorks and not the dork of the wool dorks, And I did have my deep, a few of my deep friends that I've still, like I said, connected to today. But I think that was always just a very enduring struggle for me. And the idea of sort of this very kind of traditional American dream childhood, picturesque childhood of going to summer camp and living in a neighborhood and riding your bikes and being friends with the same kids forever, and that was just so foreign to me. And yet I'd watch, movies or whatever when I was allowed to watch movies, because in Waldorf I wasn't, but like as I got older and I saw, like Camp Nowhere or whatever others, movies, and I was just like, I want that. But again, it's like we all have unique journeys and paths, and what a gift that I had to experience what I did. And I'm such a traveler and adventurer now in my life, so I really do consider that hunger for new places and new situations and people and sort of a life of risk and change and growth. And I think is something that I've just always been a foundation for me.
So what were you like in high school? Like what happened then? Because once you got to high school, it sounds like you were more in one place.
Yes, I was. I went to the LA County High School for the Arts. LACHSA. And at that time, I got in for
art.
I got in for vocal jazz.
Oh, go figure.
No surprise right there. Yeah. And my story of sort of finding my passion, if you will, or sense of purpose, or as we would say, dharma, in yogic talk, it has been a long, complex, and sometimes painful, but also beautiful journey. And for me, I think that there was always so much love of both my parents and so much admiration for them. And also this feeling that I needed to be like them to be worthy in this world, and my mom is a beautiful writer as well and was a model, and absolutely gorgeous. And in middle school, when I stopped growing this way and I started growing this way, and started realizing that I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be the model. And I was like, okay, well, I can sing. I have a talent for singing. And so I'm going to pursue that. That's the next best thing for me, and but I think, and I don't feel this way now, but there was always this imposter syndrome that I dealt with of feeling like a bootleg version of my parents. Not quite as beautiful as my mom, not as talented as my dad. Like he set such a high bar. It's like, all right, 10 Grammys. I'm like, can that ever happen for me kind of thing. And so I think being, and something that was such a value to me in reading your book and understanding that imposter syndrome and perfectionism is so inherent for so many people who suffer from ADHD, especially women. And so I felt so much compassion for myself and for all of us by reading that, being like, oh my God, I don't feel alone. But how seeing my situation as well and growing up in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles and being around, stardom in this way, just these incredible, not just the transfer, but so many incredible musicians and artists throughout my childhood. It created such a bar for me, and sort of this idea that, and you talk about this in the book too, that this idea that if you have a talent at something, this pressure almost we put on ourselves, especially in this town and in this industry, that you need to do something with it, gonna make you a star kid or whatever, and so there's that. For me, I always felt like, well, that's obviously what I had to do. And yet there was this deep desire to be smart, because I was also told I was stupid, right? I was also told all these things. So to prove myself at being not just at the same level as everybody, right? Because that was the initial goal. But then, no, I'm going to be smarter than you. I'm going to be the smartest. I'm going to do all this, So I went from flunking almost every class, starting in the 5th grade, basically. Celebration if I got a C, D, whatever, to then I think 6th and 7th grade, like, okay, mostly straight B's and getting some A's now. And then by 8th grade, I had graduated with straight A's. And I was so determined to be this. And so it was an interesting story for me that when I was in high school, and being in vocal jazz, I struggled so much with imposter syndrome and so much with this idea of being in my father's shadow, and feeling like the only reason that I was there was because of him. I mean, literally being like, can we get this chart from your dad, to do for us and stuff, and just feeling like, do you want me, or do you want me to just be the messenger for my dad's charts and all of that connection and the perks of that. And so it was a real struggle that I actually ended up switching to theater my junior year and doing that because I just couldn't handle it. And, and so I was focusing more on musical theater and acting, and really enjoyed that for a while as well. And I think it's interesting, when I was a child, I had no fear around performing. I was such like this light, and just like would just honestly like just jump off on the stage and shows. My parents would be like, get her off and stuff, whatever, but like no fear. And then all of a sudden I learned fear. It was like this bubble was broken. And then throughout that whole experience with the transition in schools and the diagnosis and everything, I became so accustomed to self-consciousness and this feeling of fear. And by the time I was in high school, my performance anxiety was so immense, so high. And which is not great if you're supposed to be a performer,
And it wasn't getting better.
It was getting worse.
The more you do it, it would reduce, right? But you say it got worse.
Well, it got better when I switched to theater, and I found something else. And the fact that I was like, God, I don't have to sing. Oh my God, such a relief. And so I really started enjoying myself, but then I started getting in my head there. And then I started having anxiety around that. And there was all these things. And then I ended up being in the musical, in the theater department, which I still had to sing. And then that brought up all of my stuff. And so it was just like, I felt like the fact that I was a singer was constantly haunting me. And then I started, did another show. And then I felt like I really was able to shine in that one. And so that was a positive experience. It was just very complex. But the interesting thing was that while I struggled so much with the arts at an art school, I excelled so much in the academics. I mean, I graduated with like a 4.2 GPA, and yet, even though I was so great at academics and writing at that point and all these things, it was time test taking that my anxiety really showed up. Yeah. And I felt like all of the wounds and known parts of my ADHD and dyslexia that I had worked through would just completely come back, and I'd be flipping words and letters, and I couldn't even think, and I couldn't anything. Complete paralysis, mental paralysis. What was the way you called it? It was like mental short circuiting. And I felt like that would happen. And so it was so incredibly painful that I would be, top student in AP English and then failed the AP English exam.
Oh, geez.
I graduated.
It's damn testing again, though, right?
It's testing.
For some kids, that is not, for most kids, frankly, that is not how you gauge how much you know, right?
No,
That you can
it's
vomit all
not.
this crap up on whatever their little time test.
Yeah.
It's all wrong. Oh my gosh, that makes me so sad. So then again, something you loved, you're like, well, why can't I perform? I know this
No.
stuff.
Performance has always been a thing that like just being and doing it in my way, in my time, I shine. But the idea of perform now, go, has always put me, I just like, a deer in headlights and I freeze. And the same thing happened with the SATs. I mean, forget math. Math was always just no go for me. I don't do numbers. I barely do letters now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you asked earlier, did I do anything to help with the dyslexia and ADHD? I did do Kumon for math specifically, which is like an alternative tutoring system. But yeah, no, math was just always just forget it. But for the SATs, I did the Princeton Review and I was doing all that. And when it was in class and not in the timed format, I was getting every answer right as far as like the non-math stuff. And I kept failing it every single time when like we do the practice. And I think I took the SATs 3 times and I failed the SATs 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
To the point that my counselor was like, yeah, you were graduating at the top of our class. But again, the same message. He's like, I wouldn't really just like keep the bar low for yourself for getting into any colleges.
Oh my gosh.
Which was
wrong too.
Devastating. Well, yeah, I mean, so I applied. I then decided that my dream school was Sarah Lawrence because I felt like that was somewhere that I would really fit in. And then I applied for a bunch of UCs. And when you're applying for UCs, you can just tick off a bunch of them or whatever.
Yeah.
And I put Berkeley. I never, ever in my wildest dreams thought I would get into Berkeley. Berkeley was like the UC that was like absolutely never going to happen to me. I thought maybe UCLA, but not Berkeley. And funny enough, I didn't get into UCLA.
Damn them.
I know. But I got into Sarah Lawrence and I got into Berkeley. And when I got into Berkeley, this is another, I'm like totally fangirling on you, but I'm going to reference your book again, because I think there was another time where you were saying how we think that the imposter syndrome is so bad, and RSD of never thinking we're good enough and all of this, that we don't believe when good things happen for us, that there's a mistake. So when I got my, somehow they messed it up and they gave me my financial aid offer for Berkeley before I got that I was in. And so that was confusing, but then I didn't believe it. I would not believe that I got in. And then somehow I got access to the online portal. And this is like, early internet days. So I was like, what is this? And I got it. I got in the portal and I saw that I was in. And I was screaming and crying, but I still didn't believe it. I thought there was a mistake. And, the truth was that Berkeley was one of those schools at that time that wanted to enroll a portion of students that were outside the box.
Yeah.
That had all these other things, but not necessarily the time test taking or the SATs or all of that going for them, right? And I fortunately did talk about my story in my college essay about my struggle and sort of, this is why I failed the SATs and stuff, but why my GPA is the way it is and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so they saw it and, and I ended up going there, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. Such an incredible experience. And I still struggled with time testing in college. It was something that I still really, was hard. But fortunately, as an English major, there was much more emphasis on the writing and the essays that you turn in on your own time. And, my own procrastivity that I could do with however I did it and stuff. But still, I was haunted by those moments. And funny full circle thing is that I, because I failed AP English, even though I was an English major at Berkeley, I had to take a class that would fulfill that requirement. So I was with a bunch of people, who were in the sciences or places that like don't, English isn't even their first language kind of thing. Like people,
they don't care about it.
No, it was like English for dummies class, right? Yeah. But I had an amazing teacher, and she was the first person who ever said, you should be a journalist. I think you'd be a great journalist. And I never, ever in my life had thought about myself necessarily being a professional writer, because at that time I still thought I was going to be a performer and I was just doing an academic major. You know, I had to have one of those just to make it worth my parents' money.
Right.
To still tell myself that I wasn't stupid, you know, still have that thing going. But I think that really stuck with me because it was this idea, this human connection and telling stories. And I think there was something about that struck me. And, you know, it would be years and years and years till that would manifest in anything professional. But if there was a value for me failing AP English and getting into that class and hearing her say that to me, you know, full circle now.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So I have a Cal story.
Yes?
My neuro diverse family, most of whom, right, have not been diagnosed. My niece, she was at UC Davis, and she wanted to go to Cal because, I don't know, something about, you know, what they offered. And so she applied, got accepted as a junior, misread the date that she had to respond back and lost her spot.
No.
And she tried everything, you know, to go back. So, yeah.
Oh,
I know.
That's heartbreaking.
I know.
I feel that in my heart.
I know. Okay. So you get through college. It sounds like a really good experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens? What about getting into the workforce?
Yeah, that was interesting. So, and again, this whole sliding doors life that happened because I had a lot of my English teachers who were like, you should go to grad school, you should pursue this professionally, blah, blah, blah. And a big part of me that was like, wouldn't that, you know, when I would think about that other life, there was this feeling of simultaneous relief and then immediately going to, you would be a failure because you're not following this dream of being a performer in some way, shape, or form.
Wow. So that wasn't good enough.
It was still not good enough.
In your head.
It was still not good enough that I was graduating from Berkeley with the academics that I had and that my academic teachers were saying, like, you could have a huge career in this.
And can I ask you, though, was this something that you really loved, or was it that you were pining away from the music because that's what you really loved?
I think it was complex. Like, I think that it was something I really loved. And I think now, as an adult, I realize it's much more my truth. I love to sing. I love it so much. And, you know, we'll get to this part of the story, but foreshadow, like what you say as well in the book is just because you have a talent or a hobby or something, if you're talented at something, doesn't necessarily mean you should make it your career. Yeah. Something that I've always said as well, and that I've learned is that some things are better left to be a passion for you. Yeah. Yeah. And I never felt like I could give myself that with music, that if I didn't try and pursue it professionally, that I would be a failure. And it was really a failure to myself because my parents were never the ones saying, you should do this. Yeah. I mean, my dad was like, can you go please be a lawyer or do something like that, you know? They didn't want that, but they saw that I had this attachment. And I think it was confusing because there was passion. There was love for it too. And growing up in the world and the family that I did, you know, and then I did have a talent for it, but that it was also such an intrinsic struggle for me. And there was so much imposter syndrome around it and so much pressure on myself to prove myself.
Did you think you were good?
I always struggled with wondering if I was good. Like, I would think I was good, but then even if people told me I was good, I would second guess myself constantly. And I still struggle with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, isn't that just kind of how our brain works? Like,
it is.
I mean, you just don't, there's always this, well, are they just saying that to be nice?
100%. When my first New York Times story was on like the cover, I was like, I still couldn't believe it. I thought it was like, well, try and do that again. That was an accident, you know? Like, I was just like, oh my God, it's crazy how we do this to ourselves. And it's very sad. And it doesn't have to be like a big accolade. It can be a simple thing that we just still don't credit ourselves for. And that's been a big journey for me of self-love and compassion and really holding space for those things. And that's, you know, mindfulness is a huge part of that and doing the deep work and, you know, but also being willing to to go into the shadow world and deal with this stuff too, not just kind of bypass it. You have to face this stuff.
I'm curious.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of it for me is I did not grow up in a family that celebrated kind of anything. They never discouraged me, though. They never said, "What are you doing? What are you?" You know, they were supportive.
Yeah.
But then when we achieved, it was kind of like, "Oh, next." And for me, what has really helped is celebrating every damn little thing. Because then that kind of tells my brain that, wait a minute, I'm celebrating this thing. I achieved this. It meant something to me. I had intention around it. I built an identity around it. So that seems to help. And I'm curious, were you celebrating along the way? And have you done anything differently if you weren't today?
My parents would celebrate. They were my biggest cheerleaders, you know? I mean, I love them so much. They're so open-minded. I mean, they celebrated when I got my period the first time by like, you know, came home to this like beautiful dinner and like my mom got me like red, my first pair of like underwear and lingerie or whatever, and like a glass of wine and mazel tov, you're a woman now. And literally, I just wanted to go in my bedroom and cry.
Exactly, me too.
You know, that's like the kind of parents that I am. Like, just like they would celebrate everything, you know, they're always in my court. And yet I had such a hard time celebrating myself. It would be really, really hard. You know, I'd have a moment of it for a long time and then I'd be like, okay, the next thing, you know, which is also the ambition and also the drive. That's one of the positive aspects of being neurodivergent.
Are you embarrassed when people compliment you? Is it kind of like, do you just brush it off? Or can you actually be in that compliment?
I think I can be in it. I think I can be in it a lot more now without ego. Mm-hmm. Because I think in the past it was like, do you really mean this? Like kind of thing. Like, you know, whereas now I've gotten really good at being like to really take take it in and to be present with that and see that as a gift and to also be like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I am that. All that you say. Thank you. And I agree, you know, and it took so long to be able to have that kind of confidence and to be coming from a place as well that wasn't from a wounded ego that was constantly needing to be reaffirmed that I was enough. Or it was either like I was too much or I wasn't enough. And, you know,
you're never just right.
No, never just not right. It's just like that constant yo-yo, right? Of just extremes.
And so what got you there? What got you to the point where now you can hear a compliment and you're like, oh, yeah. I like that you are starting to believe that actually you are good enough. In fact, you're better than good enough.
I mean, the deep work, not to sound, you know, woo-woo or trite, but it's just like, I've had a life. Like, I've been through a lot. There's been, you know, I think the years of therapy, realizing that I am worthy of some of the more worthy of some of the relationships that I was in, a lot of toxic relationships. I've struggled with eating disorders, years of addiction, and all of these things that I use to cope. And for me, you know, as my theme of my life is not shying away from that which is hard and that which is painful, but alchemizing it into something powerful and meaningful for myself that actually becomes a superpower. And I've become much more able to do that the older I've gotten and the more I've been able to release and peel off these layers of myself that no longer serve me, and to be able to, you know, and I think and it's like life happens and you sort of go with that. And I was pursuing music basically till the pandemic. It was the last time I did my last album. I was gigging a lot, and then the pandemic happened and everything changed. And I was relieved. To say, I'm done. I'm done with this. It was this global, complete unraveling of everything that was known. But I do believe that the pandemic, you know, one of the silver linings was all the constructs, the relationships, the systems, all these things that existed that were dysfunctional no longer could continue the way they did. And that happened on the microcosm of my life too. I mean, I ended my music career. my section with the LA Times went kaput. I got a divorce. I lost my home. I had a whole personal sexual awakening as far as, coming out and all this stuff that I went through in that period. And then went and lived on a sailboat in Mexico for 6 months and just decided to start anew, literally, and at that time I had already been simultaneously working as a journalist, journalist by day and musician at night kind of thing. So I was in these years during my 30s of sort of overlapping, and that was when I was starting to find a lot of joy. And I think that gave me also the strength to say I'm done with music. And music was also something I did with my ex-husband that had a lot of shadow for me, a lot around that, a lot of pain that I was also ready to let go. So I think, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I think it's both circumstantial. I think it's the willingness to do the work, and it's the timing and everything. And then for me, my spiritual practice, being a meditator and practicing Kriya Yoga and pranayama and breath work, and really being able to get clear on myself and to want to grow and to want to change and to be aligned with this highest version of myself.
So was the Kriya Yoga, the pranayama breath work, the meditation, was that something you had been doing all along, or no? Was it something that you discovered anew? Obviously when you were a child, you were around it all. And did it kind of dovetail at all into kind of this idea that, okay, all of that's gone. Now I want to figure out who I really am and how my brain works?
Yes, 100%. I mean, I'm so grateful that I was raised with this. My parents are devotees of Paramahansa Yogananda and the Self-Realization Fellowship, and they're married at beautiful Lake Shrine in Los Angeles. I was baptized there, literally grew up in Sunday school meditating, so this was my upbringing with this. And then I think when I got into college, I became much more almost secularly minded. I was less connected to my spiritual side. I was really celebrating academics and logic and that part of my brain, even though I still had it. I still practiced yoga, but much more the asanas on the mat and all of that, and less. But I've always had a spiritual foundation. It is a cornerstone of my family and me. And so that has always been there. But it definitely shifted during those years. And then in my 20s, I was in a lot of relationships that also didn't really celebrate that. And that was sort of not as much of my life. And I was at a time where I was often gaslit, and I was often made to be less than, and I was afraid, and I can't just completely put that on previous partners either. I was also just kind of finding myself, and you could be in the most, new age, open-minded kind of family and still be I got to find it my way. I got to do it my way. And I've always struggled with more dogmatic religion and structure like that, probably being, a neurodivergent Aquarian. So I'm just I needed to find things my way. And then I think the years leading into my divorce, I started finding my practice again, and I started getting really deep into it again. And I think that was partially what helped me get the strength to do it. And then generally, the ultimate collapse of COVID and everything that didn't work, like I mentioned. But then it was during that time that I got really seriously back into my practice, and found an incredible teacher, Kia Miller, who I've been studying with since then. And, did my 200-hour yoga teacher training with her during the pandemic, and have continued doing tons of different programs and trainings with her, and have just been deepening my practice. I just got back from India, which was incredible, and was able to just get to a whole other deeper level of that. But yeah, so I think it's now just such a cornerstone of who I am. And it's really what I owe to so much of how my life has changed in the last 5 years, I would say. 4 or 5 years, I really credit that. And it's fascinating having, sort of looked back at neurofeedback in a way, and how similar it is to breath work, and how it's sort of that visual manifestation, and sort of this full circle of my life of seeing, how impactful that was for me as a child, and how it kind of gave a foundation of my ability to be really hone this deep ancient breathwork practice now that has become so pivotal to my emotional self-regulation, to the ability to pause, to focus, to, you know, to be very aligned with intuition, which, as you've said, is like, can be a real superpower for those who have ADHD. And I have an extremely strong intuition, and I second guessed it for so many years. And yet that intuition was always there, right? That feeling was always there of that something that felt more true. But as I always say, I believe intuition is a muscle that you grow, just like any muscle. Absolutely. And the only way that you can strengthen that muscle is by the trial and error of learned wisdom, which is by doing the work, and it's not avoiding things that are hard. It's by learning from them, growing from them, and then, you know, ideally not doing it again.
Right.
You know, but that's how we get there, and that's how we hone our intuition. And so I think all of this has played such a huge role in just where I found myself now in my life, which I'm just so grateful for.
Yeah. And if you can't trust your brain, you got to start learning how to trust your intuition, right? Because, so I know you're writing a book.
Yes.
Tell us about your book.
Yes. It's called Tangents and Tributaries, a neurodivergent story of recovery, discovery, and unexpected love. Actually, I think it's discovery, recovery, but, you know, dyslexia. I
don't know how you remember it.
I've had to practice that one a few times. Yeah, so it's basically, it encompasses so much of what we've talked about, you know, my journey with ADHD and dyslexia, the proximity to stardom that I, you know, experienced in my life in my unusual childhood. And then, you know, going through in my older years, just like the divorce, I came out shortly after as bisexual, my experiences with polyamory that really changed my view on relationships and love. And then the more recent years, getting sober and recovering from years and years of a slew of addictions and eating disorders. But really for me, it follows a certain time frame that starts. It's a memoir. Obviously, I probably should have said that. It's a memoir. It starts, you know, during the pandemic, and this whole journey and like ends in India. Recently, I finally like kind of found my ending, which was, you know, it began on a estuary actually in Mexico when I was there, and ended on a tributary that I was staying on right next to the Ganges, to Mother Ganga. And it was just a beautiful full circle of everything. But, you know, my hope is that through my story and what I've experienced, that we can normalize and celebrate things that are deemed, you know, taboo or weird or fringe, which has been my life, not wanting to pick a lane, whether it's through what I do, my creativity, how I think, how I feel, you know, how I love. And so, yeah. And that I think as you do with your work, like that it can be another opportunity to celebrate neurodivergent minds and to see it, you know, and I do compare a lot of how I think and sort of the style of the book to jazz. And to sort of how jazz goes off script. It goes off script, and it's the improvisation, and it's these moments that really make it what it is. That's what it's known for. These, you know, and
so nonlinear, right?
So nonlinear. No, and so, you know, it's while it'll follow a somewhat linear time frame of journey, there are a lot of flashbacks to these different times of my life, and a lot of the stories that I've shared with you today about, you know, the things that really make meaning in life, these tangents that, you know, sometimes, especially for those of us that have ADHD and other neurodivergencies, we see as our failures. We see as like, oh, why can't I get it right? Why can't I follow through with this? Why did I do that whole side thing for those many years or whatnot? But those are the chapters and the experiences that give meaning to our life, that make us who we are and give richness. And so really just leaning into that and celebrating that. And that it all does come full circle, you know. I always find my way back to the point.
Right.
Sometimes it takes a minute. You know, us Dories sometimes need a little bit of some Nemo support to find our way there, but we get there.
Yeah. Well, and a much more colorful way. And I think that we get there with even more connections that a neurotypical won't pick up, right? And so I think that is literally just part of our creativity and part of our brilliance. So,
Yeah.
what do you think the key to living successfully with ADHD is?
I think it's such a personal answer. Like, I think for everyone who is neurodivergent has their own formula and their own truth that they adhere to. For me, personally, it's been a combination of things. It's been obviously, like I've spoken about, my mindfulness practice and a commitment to therapy and deep work and really going into the pain of this and understanding our brain and how we work through this process. So that has been a huge part for me. And also for me, medication has really helped. And I have a very complex journey with that. And, I was not medicated at all till I was 27 years old. So those formidable early years and all through college and everything I did with the power of my own brain and mindfulness and neurofeedback and everything. And then I, as an adult, decided to try it. And I've had a very complex relationship with it that I had to find a balanced place with it for me, because it can be a tumultuous journey. And for me personally, it did, until I got to that really mature, balanced place with it. It also played a big role in a lot of my addictive patterns as well. And so I've had to kind of really find that. But I'm so grateful now, especially that I'm sober, that I can actually see them working in their true form. And
So it's made a big difference.
Yeah, it's made a huge difference, and I'm very open about it. I mean, I take Adderall and I take Lexapro for, the Lexapro for my anxiety and having dealt with depression as well. And the combination of that with my Adderall, and God forbid, take Adderall as prescribed, not just like the crazy ways that I did in my younger years, has been huge. And even when I was taking them as prescribed, I was still not giving them their full strength when I was smoking weed and cigarettes and drinking and stuff. Like, that was not allowing me to be. So when I finally got clean, I was just like, oh my God, this is it. That meditation, that. So, I mean, my thing is, meditation and medication. There you go. And that doesn't work for everybody, not for everyone. And I think we all have to find our way. And I certainly have seen, when I first started taking Adderall, I felt like the heavens had opened, and it was like Valhalla for the first time. I was like, oh my God, like, I've never seen my brain function like this. And it excited me so much, and excited me too much, and my impulse control at that point. And I was also dealing with other addictions. It just basically was a perfect storm for instigating more of that. It's like that cycle of take more than I need of Adderall, which gets like, with the amphetamine side of that, like, okay, I want to smoke a ton of nicotine now. And then I am able to drink more than I really should because of this. And then to offset this high that my body is on, I'm just going to smoke a lot of weed and then repeat the cycle. And then every day. And then, it also helped with me having a struggle with eating disorders. So I became anorexic and was very much, it was all this kind of cyclical part of my life. And it was during a time as well where I was still like really committed to being a singer and pursuing that journey. I was also in a really tumultuous relationship and marriage at that time that it all kind of played together. And I, again, for all those aspects, the addiction, the body shaming and dysmorphia and starving myself, and also my marriage, for all of that, I am grateful now because I wouldn't be where I'm at now. But, Adderall can be dangerous when it's used in this way, and as a party drug too, and all of that. And it was completely erratic. And then I actually got scared of it at a certain point and stopped taking it, I think for about a year or so. And I really saw the effect on my brain. Then I was like, oh my God, I'm struggling. And so then I just kind of started taking it like as needed here and there. And then that's when I had my aha moment. I was like, what if you just took it as your doctor prescribed it? Like, what could that be something there? And so I did. And then the final one was then I got sober, and then I was like, okay, I found it. I'm great now.
So do you do it every day? I mean, do you take it every day? Not do it.
I
You take it
do.
every day? Okay.
I do it. I do it every day. Yeah. Yes, I take it every day. And it's, I finally found the dosage and everything that works for myself and my body. And it's not very high at all.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I think that, again, it's all the pieces. It's that along with my practice, along with therapy, along with doing the hard work, along with cleaning my life up and my health and taking care of my body, all these things that have supported my brain to be able to function at its best. And do I still struggle? Absolutely, I do. Yeah. But I have the tools now to know how to hone myself and bring myself back and get myself to a copacetic state that I know I'm functioning at my highest self. So, yeah.
So, Ariel, where can people find you? You can see the R is a little bit less now because it's starting to get into my brain. Ariel, where can people find you if they want to know more about you and what you do?
Yeah, so you can find me on social media at Instagram. So at Arielle Paul, all one word, Arielle. Paul,
I wrote it right.
Paul. You did.
Wonderful.
Good job.
Okay.
So that, and the same with Facebook, same handle.
Okay.
And then you can follow me at NewYorkTimes.com// I believe it is Arielle-Paul.
Okay, we're going to put that in the show notes. Wonderful. Ariel, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. This was super fun.
This was amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for what you do in inspiring so many women and just humans in general. It's incredible, and you've really, really helped me as well. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you for your kind words. So,
yes,
that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Ariel, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you here next week.